true horror stories. The dream showed me exactly how I would die, down to the make and model of the car and the precise location where it would happen. 3 days later, I stood in that exact parking lot and watched it all begin to unfold. This is the story of the warning I almost ignored. During my sophomore year of college, I developed a routine that became as natural as breathing. Every few weeks, I would make the 4-hour drive from my university in the city back to my childhood home in the countryside, where my parents still lived. The journey had become so familiar that I could practically drive it with my eyes closed. Every exit memorized, every landmark anticipated. There was one particular rest stop I relied on without fail, a weathered Chevron station positioned roughly halfway between campus and home. The place sat in an odd pocket of isolation, wedged between a stretch of dense pine forest on the eastern side and what looked like abandoned industrial lots to the west. Most travelers bypassed it entirely, preferring the brighter, busier stations closer to the main highway exits. But I had stopped there so many times over the past year that it felt like a checkpoint, a familiar waypoint that marked the midpoint of my journey. The building itself was unremarkable, a single-story structure with faded blue paint and flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed loudly enough to hear from the pumps. There were only 6 fuel stations, and I rarely saw more than 1 or 2 other vehicles there at any given time. The attendant inside was always the same elderly man with thick glasses who never made conversation beyond asking if I needed a receipt. Despite its run-down appearance and isolated location, I had never felt unsafe there. Familiarity breeds comfort, and this place had become woven into the fabric of my routine. That sense of security shattered on a Tuesday night in late October. I had gone to bed early that evening, exhausted from midterm exams and already mentally preparing for the drive home I would make in 2 days. Sleep came quickly, but what followed was unlike any dream I had experienced before. Most dreams dissolve upon waking, leaving behind only fragments and impressions that fade like morning mist. This one was different. This one felt more like a memory of something that hadn't happened yet. In the dream, my girlfriend and I were making the familiar drive home together, something we often did when our schedules aligned. She was in the passenger seat scrolling through music on her phone, and I was behind the wheel watching the mile markers tick by. We approached the halfway point of our journey, and as always, I signaled to exit toward the Chevron station. The sky in my dream was overcast, heavy with clouds that threatened rain, and the light had that peculiar gray quality of late afternoon sliding into early evening. We pulled into the lot, and I parked at pump number 3, the one closest to the convenience store entrance. My girlfriend stepped out immediately, mentioning something about needing to use the restroom and grabbing snacks for the rest of the drive. I remained in the driver's seat, adjusting the air conditioning and pulling out my phone to check messages. The dream had that hyper-real quality where every detail felt sharp and present. The texture of the steering wheel under my palm, the faint smell of gasoline and hot asphalt, the distant hum of highway traffic. Everything seemed perfectly normal. until a dark blue sedan pulled into the lot. The vehicle was older, maybe from the early 2000s, with rust spots along the wheel wells and a crack running across the windshield. It moved slowly, almost deliberately, and parked 2 spaces away from my car. 4 men emerged from the vehicle, and even in the dream, I noticed specific details about them, their ages ranging from maybe early 20s to late 20s, 30s, their clothing casual, one wearing a red baseball cap, another in a faded denim jacket. They began talking immediately, their voices carrying across the parking lot despite my closed windows. The conversation was in Spanish, rapid and animated, and though my understanding of the language was limited, certain words cut through with clarity. They were arguing about something, their gestures becoming more aggressive. And I heard fragments that suggested they were discussing a transaction that had gone wrong. One of them, the youngest looking one in the red cap, kept gesturing toward a black duffel bag that sat on the hood of their car. Another, taller and broader, seemed to be disagreeing vehemently, his voice rising in anger. And then one of them looked directly at me. In that moment, everything in the dream seemed to slow down. The man who had noticed me, the one in the denim jacket, said something to his companions and began walking toward my car. His stride was purposeful, unhurried, like someone who had already made a decision and was simply executing it. I felt my heart rate accelerate in the dream, felt the instinct to start the car and leave, but my dream self remained frozen, watching through the windshield as he approached. He walked around the front of my vehicle, maintaining eye contact the entire time, and as he reached my driver's side door, his hand moved to his waistband. The gun appeared so suddenly, it felt unreal, a dark metal shape that caught the gray light. He raised it without hesitation, pointed it directly at my face through the window, and pulled the trigger. I woke up before I heard the shot, but I felt it. The impact registered as a sensation of pressure and heat, and then immediate darkness. My eyes opened to find myself in my dorm room, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, my heart hammering so violently I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:22 a.m., and for several long moments I couldn't move, couldn't shake the absolute certainty that what I had just experienced was more than a simple nightmare. The details refused to fade. Usually dreams become hazy within minutes of waking, but this one remained crystalline in my memory. I could still see the rust spots on the sedan, could still hear the cadence of the men's voices, could still feel the weight of that final moment before everything went dark. I spent the rest of that night lying awake, trying to convince myself it meant nothing. Dreams are just dreams, I told myself, random firings of neurons processing the day's experiences and anxieties. There was no such thing as premonition, no mystical warning system embedded in the human subconscious. But I couldn't shake the feeling. 2 days later, my girlfriend and I loaded up the car and began the drive home as planned. The morning was bright and clear, nothing like the overcast afternoon from my dream, and I tried to take comfort in that difference. As we drove, I debated whether to mention the dream at all. It seemed absurd, the kind of thing that would make me sound paranoid or superstitious. So I said nothing, focusing instead on the road and the playlist my girlfriend had put together for the journey. The first 2 hours passed without incident. We talked about upcoming assignments, made plans for the holiday break, stopped once for coffee at a rest area I had never used before. Everything felt normal, routine, safe. And then we approached the exit for the Chevron station. I had been so focused on the conversation that I almost missed it, almost took the exit automatically as I had done dozens of times before. But something made me glance toward the station as we passed the exit ramp. The dark blue sedan was there. My hands tightened on the steering wheel so suddenly that my girlfriend noticed immediately. She asked if I was all right, but I couldn't respond yet because I was still processing what I was seeing. The vehicle was parked in almost the exact position from my dream, 2 spaces away from pump number 3. 4 men stood around it, one in a red baseball cap, another in a denim jacket. They were talking, gesturing, and as we passed, I saw one of them reach toward his waistband. I didn't stop. I didn't take the exit. I pressed harder on the accelerator and kept driving, my breath coming in short gasps that I tried to control. My girlfriend was asking questions now, her voice concerned, and I finally managed to speak. I told her about the dream, about every detail that had seemed so impossibly specific, and about what I had just seen at the Chevron station. She turned in her seat to look back through the rear window, but we were already too far away to see anything clearly. We found another gas station 15 miles down the highway, a busy shell with bright lights and multiple attendants and families with children walking in and out of the convenience store. I filled up there instead, my hand still shaking slightly as I held the fuel pump. The rest of the drive passed in a strange fog of disbelief and relief. We talked through what had happened, tried to rationalize it, considered every possible explanation. Maybe it was just coincidence, a remarkable but ultimately meaningless alignment of random events. Maybe the car wasn't even the same one, just a similar model. Maybe the men were just ordinary travelers having a loud conversation. But I knew what I had seen. Every detail had matched. I never stopped at that Chevron station again. Even months later, when I continued making the same drive home, I would take a different exit, use a different rest stop, anything to avoid that stretch of isolated road. My girlfriend and I talked about it occasionally over the following weeks, usually late at night when conversations turned philosophical. She admitted that the whole experience had unsettled her deeply, that she couldn't explain away the specificity of the match between my dream and what we had seen. I still don't know what would have happened if we had stopped that day. Maybe nothing at all. Maybe those men would have finished their conversation and driven away, and I would have filled up my tank and continued home without incident. Maybe the gun I thought I saw was just a phone or a wallet, or maybe the dream was exactly what it felt like, a warning from some part of my mind that recognized danger before my conscious self could process it. What I do know is this: sometimes our instincts speak to us in languages we don't fully understand, through symbols and scenarios that seem impossible until they suddenly aren't. And when something inside you screams that you're in danger, When a dream feels less like fantasy and more like preview, maybe the smartest thing you can do is listen. I still make that drive several times a year, and every single time I pass that exit, I glance toward the old Chevron station. The building is still there, still weathered and isolated, still sitting in that odd pocket between the forest and the empty lots. But I never stop, and I never will.